Formula One's top teams, Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes, all believe they are at risk of penalties for going over the sport's budget cap this season, with Christian Horner calling for the FIA to act quickly to avoid an accounting world championship. All F1 teams have a cost cap of $140 million, or £119 million for 2022, with the limit intended to improve competition. But a drastic rise in inflation and freight costs have put teams' budgets under unexpected strains. That has led to Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes, the sport's biggest and currently most competitive teams, all stressing that the budget cap to be increased due to the force majeure circumstances. However, there is opposition on the grid, such as from Alfa Romeo and Alpine, who see no reason to up the cap. At the time, we all agreed to those reductions. Nobody could have predicted what was going on in the world and how that is driving inflation in every household globally, Red Bull team principal Horner told Sky Sports F1. We're seeing it in Formula One. We're seeing it with logistics. We're seeing it with energy costs. To me, that's something that the FIA need to take into account. They have the ability, through force majeure, to apply an inflationary effect because we don't have enough levers to get down to the cap. I think that's the same for probably 7 of the teams in Formula One. We've still got 6 months left this year. Inflation still looks like it's rising rather than diminishing, and hopefully the FIA will act shortly. Agreeing with his rival team boss, Ferrari's Mattia Binotto added, "I think that there will be no way for us to stay below. So I'm pretty sure that at some stage we will go over." In the regulations, there is a threshold, which is a 5%. If you do not exceed the 5% on the top of what's the budget cap threshold, it will be considered a minor breach. And what's a minor breach in case of force majeure? What will the stewards and the FIA decide on that in terms of penalties? No idea, but I don't think there is any way for us, and for many teams, simply to stay within, and even laying off people. I don't think that's a good and right choice. Horner also stressed that Red Bull were going to end up with more people in our financial department than we have in the drawing office, and added, "What we don't want to see is that Formula One becomes an accounting world championship rather than a technical or sporting one." Mercedes are also siding with their rivals on the grid. The cost cap was introduced for specific purposes to allow the small teams to spend the same amount as the big ones, explained Toto Wolff. There shouldn't be any bargaining every year to lift the cost cap, but I think we're facing an exceptional situation in that we have a real inflation that is north of 7% at the moment. Our energy prices in Brackley have tripled. Our freight costs have tripled. I think that is something that needs to be considered because we want to avoid any circumstances reorganising and restructuring the big teams again in a way that would be really damaging for us as a team and as an industry. This is a force majeure situation, having a raging war in the Ukraine, and the consequences that it had on energy prices is not something anybody could have foreseen. There needs to be some sort of compromise for the teams that are against the inflationary adjustments and the teams that are for it. 2 of the teams that are against an adjustment are Alpine and Alfa Romeo. Most teams do their budgets in November-December timeframe for the following year, and we're no different, stressed Alpine's Otmar Zafnauer. And at the time, inflation was already at 7+%. RPI in England was 7.1, 7.2%. We took that into consideration when we did our budgets and laid out all the development work that we are going to do, and we're still within it. Where there's a will, there's a way, and we set a budget cap, and we should stick to it. Alfa Romeo's Fred Vasseur, meanwhile, said that teams can just stop developing their cars sooner, reducing costs. We're in this situation, and sooner or later we will have to stop the development of the car because we will be at the limit of our budget, and I think everybody can do the same. It's absolutely not a case of force majeure because inflation is not a case of force majeure. Horner, however, said wanting the budget increase was not about new parts. We haven't introduced that many components, particularly compared to a standard season, he continued. Of course, what we're trying to do is be very selective in the parts that we're producing. It's a very, very different tactic and a very different way. I think what we do need is clarity, and clarity quickly, because, quite simply, it's not right to be held to ransom by a couple of teams that aren't perhaps effective, because that was never the design of the budget cap. The budget cap was there to stop teams from a spending frenzy. Reducing the amount of money being spent on the sport is clearly high on the priority list for Formula One as a governing body, as it's not just the constructors that are having their money capped, but also potentially the drivers. And that news has not gone down well. Max Verstappen's Red Bull team have slammed suggestions there could be a salary cap for F1 drivers. Some bosses have reportedly ganged up on the sport's big earners by reviving talks of a maximum allowance for those behind the wheel. Total idiocy. World turned upside down, said a member of the Red Bull team ahead of this weekend's Monaco Grand Prix, according to Dutch publication De Telegraaf. Verstappen was handed a new contract ahead of the 2022 season after claiming his maiden F1 title last year. The 24-year-old penned a 5-year deal, which meant his salary more than doubled to a staggering £40 million a season. And that saw him become the highest earner on the grid. Lewis Hamilton, who had previously been the best paid driver in F1, earns a reported £29 million every season as a base salary. And the duo are well ahead of their rivals, with Alpine genius Fernando Alonso, Aston Martin star Sebastian Vettel, and McLaren ace Daniel Ricciardo all in the top 5 of earners courtesy of their reported £10 million a year wages. Red Bull clearly felt they needed to reward Verstappen for his title success last season and indicate to the rest of the grid their intentions to dominate the sport in the coming years by pinning the superstar down. But teams who lack the same financial clout as the likes of Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes might well be thinking that a salary cap for drivers could level the playing field. Red Bull chief Christian Horner has already revealed he is against the driver salary cap. Of course, if a team chooses to spend more than the cap, it comes out within the budget cap, so it's not therefore limiting the amount a driver can earn. The 48-year-old said in 2020, when the cap was first being tabled, it is simply dictating to the team that there would be a maximum allowance for the drivers, and anything beyond that would have to be out of the chassis cap. The Silver Arrows chief Toto Wolff has explained in the past that he is in favour of it. The salary cap is something that we have supported, Wolff said 2 years ago. If you cap the team at $145 million with a downward slope, you need to, at a certain stage, also cap high salaries. But I don't think we should lose the superstars of today, so it needs to be a gradual introduction from 2024 onwards. And in 2020, Hamilton said the concept of a cap has surprised drivers. I didn't even know that was being discussed, the veteran said. I think from a driver's point of view, it's a surprise to us. Alfa Romeo team principal Frederic Vasseur doesn't expect the driver's salary cap to be introduced within the next few seasons, even if all F1 teams were in favour. He felt that the issue was a long-term process that could potentially come to fruition when the new regulations come into effect in 2026. The Frenchman said, in any case, it will be a long-term process that you can't imagine that will be in place for 22 or 23, that it has to be at least for 26, perhaps a bit more. But again, I'm not sure that we'll have the biggest issue on this. McLaren team principal Andreas Seidel felt that any discussion relating to the driver's salary cap would be complex, given the current situation, and would need to be dealt with carefully. He, however, also expressed a desire to transition away from the current model into something that is more in line with other competitive sports. Seidel said, I think it's not that difficult. I'm sure you will find ways of transition dealing with that situation. As I said again before, it's important to have these discussions now about the details behind closed doors because it is complex, obviously. But we know from other sports it's possible. And yeah, that's how we deal with it. When the F1 cost cap was originally introduced in 2020, drivers' salaries were one of the most hotly contested topics. While smaller teams were mostly in favour of a salary cap in some form or the other, most top teams were firmly against the idea.